Good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Professor Myisha Cherry and Reverend Dante Stewart. Thank you for joining us tonight. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of nearly 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Myisha Cherry is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of California, Riverside. She is also the director of the Emotion and Society Lab. Her research interest lies at the intersection of moral psychology and social and political philosophy. More specifically, she is interested in the role of emotions and attitudes in public life. Professor Cherry's books include The Moral Psychology of Anger, co-edited with Owen Flanagan, Unmuted, Conversations on Prejudice, Oppression, and Social Justice, and The Case for Rage, Why Anger is Essential to Anti-Racist Struggle, which makes a case for anger at racial injustice. Her new book is The Failures of Forgiveness, What We Get Wrong and How to Do Better. Professor Cherry is also the host of the Unmute podcast, a podcast where she interviews philosophers about the social and political issues of our day. Reverend Dante Stewart is an ordained minister and the author of Shoutin' in the Fire, an American Epistle. He is an award-winning writer whose work has appeared or is forthcoming in many outlets, including The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and Time Magazine. His forthcoming ESPN essay on what football means to one small Black rural town is being produced into an ESPN documentary on which Dante also serves as a writer. I should have called you. Sorry about that. Reverend Stewart is a sought-after voice on matters of faith, heartbreak, justice, and the power of telling the stories that matter, and has spoken on these issues for NPR.
What's up, Myisha? How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
It's so good. It's so good. Thank you for, first of all, for writing this incredible, amazing book. And let me just say this. Thank you to Family Action Network, to everybody who made this event possible. Thank you to everybody that's showing up tonight. We thank you. We thank you. We thank you. I don't know where you're at in the world. You may be on Eastern Standard Time like me, or you may be on Pacific Time like Myisha. We thank you. You may be somewhere we don't even know. Well, we thank you for showing up. And as you know, we say, you know, we want to support one another, not just showing up, but also with our dollars and supporting this book, this incredible book, and all the wonderful things that Professor Cherry, Dr. Cherry, has done and is doing in this present moment. So let's get to it. Let's get to it. Let's get to it. Yo, you have written an incredible book. When I got to the end of the book in the conclusion, especially on that chapter on radical repair and leading into the conclusion, one of the things that I found myself writing down is that this is a masterclass in forgiveness. Mm. It is a masterclass in forgiveness for a few reasons. Number one, I feel like forgiveness is a word, much like grief, that we say all the time, but we may not know what we mean or what it means or what it entails for us. And also, I feel like for this work, you have done so much of the kind of serious spiritual, moral, and even some, in some sense, like the heart of philosophy is really, some sense, to ask the real deep questions and point a way forward and move us forward, as Mary Oliver would say, is that the point of all of this is to move things forward. And I feel like this book does an incredible job, like moving things forward. Now, I went and I did a little search on you. I went all the way back to the time where you was writing for the HuffPost.
Oh, okay.
All the way back in the day. I went back in the day, and I'm talking about, like, one of the things I wonder in this moment, I mean, you have been writing in public, you know, doing the kind of justice-oriented, loving teacher work, much like Maya Angelou, helping us, you know, move forward and shake things up. And also, I feel like your work is a serious act of care. You really, like, right now, there's something about forgiveness that, like, has been captivating you, like, over the last few years. I want to know when that started for you. I mean, it's always been there, but, like, I feel like now you really like it's something you've been really, like, really hitting on. What? Tell me the story there. Tell me the story there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on it in some ways. I'm quite interested philosophically in things that we think we know,
Mm,
but at the end of the day, we have no idea.
mm,
And so my previous book was on anger. We think we know what that means. We think we know what the value of it is. So we tell people not to be angry, with confidence. And so I wrote that book to kind of undo that kind of certainty. And the same thing when it comes to forgiveness. But of course, in order for me to write something, I gotta feel annoyed by our overconfidence. So a lot of it has to do with what was happening in our social world around about 2012. But there's no doubt that there's some residue about just personal experience with forgiveness and things that I was witnessing since I was a kid. So let me talk about the social stuff, because I think by paying attention to the social stuff, I was able to get clarity about my own personal life and personal journey and personal relationship with forgiveness. So I just remember two particular instances. So 2012, the murder of Trayvon Martin. And after him, a slew of other Black folks were being killed by the police. And there were these press conferences, these interviews that were being done by reporters. And I noticed that there was something repetitive happening in these particular press conferences, something that I would describe as a ritual in the book, where the reporters will always ask the following: can you find it in your heart to forgive? And it's interesting because it seems, forgiveness seems like a relevant topic, perhaps even a useful concept to employ and to think about in that particular moment. But I was wrestling with why that question made me feel uneasy, while I felt uncomfortable with it and even resistant to the implications of it. And so I wanted to really dig deep into what made me uncomfortable with that particular question. What was it about forgiveness that we thought was so relevant and in that moment? And what were we mistaken about forgiveness? And then, of course, you have the Dylann Roof situation at Emanuel. And that's a different kind of situation where reporters are not asking victims if they couldn't forgive. You have Black folks saying in the court in which they will be justified with withholding their forgiveness, but they're adamant and they're confident that let me just say some of the family members, because some of them, others did not forgive, were expressive about their forgiveness. And I wanted to make sense, not necessarily about what they were doing, because I know what they were doing. I'm a human being. I know what they were doing. I was interested with our fascination and why we thought that what they were doing would end our racial problems. And so you got the combination of 2012, you got the combination of 2016, where all of these issues and all these social issues, which I felt was just a public mirror into how we were perceiving forgiveness to be, who we felt were responsible for ushering it in, what we thought it could do and only do. And I wanted to really peel that apart and challenge us to kind of think differently about forgiveness.
Yeah, which I think, you write this is literally on literally the beginning of the book, from the straight jump. You write on page 4, we think that forgiveness is the letting go of negative feelings. It aims at reconciliation and is necessary to build a better future. It is what the mature extend and what the bitter hold back. We think promoting it is always a virtue and discouraging it is always a vice.
Yeah.
Say more.
Yeah, when you all read the book, you're going to realize that none of those things are true.
Facts.
Or at least that's kind of what I want to uncover. So let me try to take it slow here. So we have what I would describe as a narrow view about forgiveness. And this narrow view is narrow in very different respects. So we have a tendency to think that forgiveness, what it is to forgive, is to let go of anger. Now, I already told you all I wrote a book about anger. So of course, I'm not going to be down with that, or at least thinking that forgiveness always entails the letting go of anger or the moderation of anger. Because for a lot of times, for my mom, for example, I don't think my mom was really ever angry at me. I think there was disappointment. There was like a lot of emotions. So anger is not always the response that we have to wrongdoing. So why do we think that that's what it always entails? Forgiveness is what it always entails. So we think that forgiveness is letting go of anger. And we think that it always aims at a particular goal. And that goal being the most extreme goal, which is reconciliation, reconciling ourselves with the offender. And we have a tendency to think that any kind of other moral practice, whether that's changing our behavior towards the wrongdoer or changing our attitude towards them, is not suffice. Or we think that even if you have the anger component, if you don't aim for reconciliation, then it's not forgiveness. And I want to say, I want to suggest, well, forgiveness may look like that in some contexts, but not all the time. And so the way in which I describe it is that we need to broaden the way in which we think about forgiveness, that forgiveness involves a variety of more practices. It could be I let go of my anger. It could be I let go of my hatred. It could be I let go of my contempt. It could be that I change my behavior towards you. And it aims for a variety of reparative aims. It could be reconciliation, but it also could be moral repair. It could be relief. It could be release. It could be release for the wrongdoer or relief for myself. It could be more repair between you and I, just more repair with myself. So I'm just trying to broaden what forgiveness is. And I think what that's going to do is several things. For one, it's going to allow us to recognize it when it happened, when someone gifts it to us, right? It's going to lessen the criticisms that we have and the judgments that we have when people's forgiveness don't look like the way that we want it to look, right? But also, I think there's another narrow way in which we think about forgiveness. We think that when it comes to forgiveness practices or any kind of endeavor in which we're trying to reach repair, that all it takes is for the victim to extend forgiveness and everything would be okay. And I describe forgiveness as a practice in the book that all of us have a role to play in, right? So the victim may or may not have a role. The wrongdoer has a role, right? We got to get some apologies. We got to get some reparative actions involved. It also involves the community. It involves bystanders, right? That involves affirming and validating the victim as opposed to gaslighting them. It involves them not rushing the victim to forgive. It involves them accepting whatever response a victim may have. It involves them engaging in the work to kind of create healing and repair in our world. So forgiveness is so much more than we think it is, but it also involves so much more people than we thought that it involves. But also, and this is another narrow way we think that of forgiveness, that if we forgive, everything will be okay. And I want to say life is a little bit more messy than that. That to think that forgiveness can do all the things is a way of engaging in magical thinking, that even forgiveness has its limits. But I want to say that as long as we aim for what I call radical repair, then the effort at any kind of healing will always be worth it in the end. And you can get that radical repair with or without forgiveness.
Facts. And it takes me to this moment. I am sitting in 2019. I'm in California. I'm living in Monterey. Botham John, he's murdered. Yeah. And the trial happens. And I'll literally never forget this moment. Like, absolutely never forget this moment where here I am, I'm inside of our apartment looking at the television. His brother tells Amber Geiger that he forgives her. And not just that, he literally gives her a hug.
Yeah.
And I know in my sanctified soul, in my sanctified soul, I was rattled up a little bit because I was like, man, if I was honest, like, I felt like in my own personal life, I felt like she didn't deserve it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, and as I read your book, you actually addressed this particular moment. Mm-hmm. And I was so kind of shaken because, like any good philosopher, I had my frames on it. You made me take my frames off and you made me do like this. And with your students, when your students do like this, they doing either two things in their head. They cursing you out or they saying, I'm about to leave, right? So here I am, I take my glasses off and I thought about that again because you challenge my thinking in that, like, wow, I made it too much about Branch John's hug. Mm-hmm. And I put too much burden to forgive her. Mm-hmm. How did you come to that insight? Because that's such a powerful insight that I never thought about like, you should let people be able to experience their forgiveness the way they do it and not judge them because of it. Mm-hmm. Because, like, for you, there's something about empowering the victim that I feel like runs through this text. Yeah. I mean, to answer your question, a lot of it has to do with, just think about your own kind of emotional reaction in that moment, right? You're feeling the thing, right?
And what I like to do is just go a step deeper. Why am I feeling the thing? And a lot of answers, I may get a lot of answers, and then I try to parse through, okay, is it fair now to feel the thing? Right? What are the assumptions that goes into me feeling the thing? All right, so let me be a little bit more specific. I know America has a very short memory when it comes to death, Black death. So the case that we're referring to is the off-duty police officer who goes into an apartment that she perceives as her own. We believe that she's a little bit tipsy. She sees a man sitting on what she thinks is her couch, eating ice cream, and she shoots him and kills him. Unbeknownst to her, I guess in that moment, she entered the wrong house. She entered a neighbor's house and shot him dead. And so we have this case moments later in which not only does Jean's brother forgives her, hugs her, but also we know that the judge did some things too. But we'll talk about that at another time in another book. So I have to really wrestle with, why did that bother me initially? And mind you, as we said before, is that what I'm trying to do is to suggest that we have a magical way about thinking about what forgiveness can do. And I'm trying to understand my initial response to that hug and that forgiveness, and also my peers. I mean, I cite a few writers who also had problems with that hug and with that utterance of forgiveness. And I thought to myself, I don't want people to have magical concepts of forgiveness. But the reason why I was initially mad about that occurrence is because I'm also having magical thinking about withholding forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Then I'm thinking, if he would have held on to it, we would have got reparations the next day.
Hey, I was over here rooting for Buddy to like, hey, bro,
you know what I mean?
Like,
so just as we put so much stake in what forgiveness can do, I think part of my emotional response had to do with how much we put into withholding forgiveness as well. But let me go a step deeper, because that may not be convincing to folks. You're right that I advocate for victims. And as I said before, is that I think that we think that the practice of forgiveness only involves the victim, that only the victim has a role to play in the work of repair. And I think in that particular moment, we have a young man who's deciding to make decisions for himself to heal. And we need to respect his decisions to heal himself and the journey that he went on. And really wrestle with, why do we find that to be his act to be problematic? And the answer that I came up with is that we're concerned about the social interpretation of his forgiveness. We know that forgiveness is going to be read by white folks as Black folks acquiescing under oppression and under conditions of violence, right? And we don't want white people to think that way. But why won't we just challenge white people not to think that way? Why do we have to interfere with the healing of a young man? And why do we have to treat this young man as if he's Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, as if his emotional and spiritual life is supposed to be representative and inspiring to all mankind? That's putting too much burden and too much pressure on victims. We need to engage in the work of undoing the social interpretation. And the work that we're asking him to do is the work that I'm challenging us to do.
Facts. Which also brings me to, you did your Master's of Divinity at the great Howard.
HU?
Hey,
yes.
You know, right? That's what y'all say, right?
Yes.
I got a couple of friends who went to Howard. So there is also a part of, I think, and you talk about this particularly in Forgiveness as a Political Project, and you spoke of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah.
Where I think we have to challenge the notion. I'm Reverend Dante Stewart. Mm-hmm. I do feel like we have to challenge the notion in which, like, what you write about that, like, forgiveness isn't an action or a process, like, or even it shouldn't even be expected. And I think in our society, especially, as our society is increasingly, constantly under the kind of sway of a Christian idea of being together. Mm-hmm. So we just imagine, that, like, okay, when something wrong is done, then God expects you to forgive someone. Okay, you're a wife, there's a domestic violence situation, and you expect to forgive your husband. We know growing up in churches, there was this case, or someone wronged someone else. You expected to forgive them. You expected to forgive them. You expected to forgive them. And I feel like there's a limitation there, because as you write so wonderfully and so compellingly, like, we mess up when we put timelines on forgiveness. Mm-hmm. we mess up when we like make people feel as if like, okay, like you got to forgive like right now, right here, right then, right there. And I think this is also like the problem of our country right now, while we're continually politically in the situation that we find ourselves in, is because we want to praise the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for what they got right. And that's just forgiveness, right? The idea of being together. But we don't want to honestly assess where the Truth and Reconciliation Commission might have got it wrong.
Yeah.
And how that informs our life together as a country who's constantly in struggles about what pool it's in, where it's going, the identity of who it's going to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would love for you to speak more to that, like, you know, like our kind of addiction to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission almost, and what we get wrong about it, especially as we think about these moments, these kind of public moments of violence and injustice.
Yeah, I think that the case is fascinating and it's instructive on so many levels of things that we can learn, and also things that we need to stay clear of. So, you know, one of my first memories of even thinking about forgiveness publicly comes from being a young person watching the human rights violation testimonies. I mean, I remember sitting, it's as if it was yesterday. I remember, there's not a lot of things I remember watching on television, but I remember on my old CRT television that I played Nintendo on, like watching those hearings. So I remember primarily in my mind, when I think about the TRC, is Black women crying and forgiving. Like that's what's etched into my memory. And you think about how things are different now in South Africa. It's no longer apartheid. It's a new democratic South Africa. And so you put two and two together, my young mind, and let's just say my ignorant mind until I read this book, is that, oh, the way in which a new democratic South Africa was created is because Black women forgave those atrocities, or Black people forgave the atrocities. But if you dig deep into the archive, or you don't even have to go that far, I mean, just think about the commission was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They were made up of several committees that were engaged in a variety of efforts to do the work of reconciliation. So there was a reparations committee that was responsible for getting land back and property back from Black folk that was stolen, right? You have an amnesty commission that was very interested in trying to figure out how to prosecute and get justice. You had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission itself, the human rights violation testimonies, in which truth was being uttered, testimonies were being made, right? Beyond that, what was happening in those churches, there were people that was going back into these communities, literally trying to unbury the bodies, try to figure out where the bodies were buried, right? So with so many reparative truth work, reparations work that was being done. And so that totally gets away from the magical thinking that we think that Black women forgiving is the thing that created new democratic South Africa. No, truth created it. Justice created it. Reparations created it, right? So that really, and then there was some people go into the testimonies. There's also a lot of South Africans who did not forgive, who are resistant to forgiveness. And that's also on the record, but we have a new South Africa. And I think what that shows us, number one, is that forgiveness was a road towards reconciliation, but it wasn't the road, because there were some people who didn't forgive, and we still have a new democratic South Africa. And it also reminds us that forgiveness is not going to be all the things that gets us there, or just uttering forgiveness. You gotta give people reasons to forgive, right? You gotta give people reasons to want to reconcile. And I think the justice work, the reparations work was for us to do that. Now you compare that to the American case. That was and think about it. TRC was a political project of reconciliation. It wasn't a reporter just randomly asking a Black woman if they can forgive. There were efforts by political leaders and religious leaders, people in the community. This was a democratic effort. And so already America falls short. First of all, we don't want to deal with the truth, as James Baldwin reminds us. So we're not going to get South African results. We barely want to relieve student debt loan, let alone reparations for Black folk, right? We have a long way to go. So when I hear forgiveness rhetoric, and I know about what the TRC and the efforts that they put in, it rings hollow to me, right? We don't really want to do what I call kind of radical repair, which is getting to the root of problems and really going about healing. So we can learn a lot about the South Africa, know what to do, But we also got to be careful of what not to do, right? Now, as I think you were hitting at South Africa, predominantly Christian nation. There was, Bishop Tutu, there was religious leaders doing these things, but we got to be careful that just because we're religious doesn't necessarily mean everybody else is religious, right? So even, the commandments of forgiving and the conceptions that we have about forgiveness, when we're in a pluralist society, not everyone is going to agree with us on what God said. And I think that just reminds us that at best, a circular project of forgiveness is important, but also goes back to that praise piece, right? So I told you that in the hearing, there were people who decided to forgive and they were praised. And then there were people who withheld forgiveness and they were looked at as if they didn't understand the process, right? There were people who were mad and felt that they were being forced to forgive. They were being coerced to forgive. So we got to be very, very careful, particularly these public requests for forgiveness. You got to be very, very careful and not making them, because they do put pressure on victims. They do perhaps can coerce victims to forgive. And we need to be patient and not do those things.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I think we really get wrong in our country. Because I really want to go down to the personal level for just you and I, like even just our own personal stories with like forgiveness. I want to stay to political real quick. I think that's one of the things that is so brilliant about like your previous book, The Case for Rage, and this book, The Failures of Forgiveness. They felt like they almost like needed to be written behind each other. Did you feel that?
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
It's interesting because so Anger was the first book, but I came to anger via forgiveness. So when these things were happening, I was trying to figure out, so like, as a philosophy nerd, I go to the philosophical text. Some people go to the Bible. I look at the 500 archive and try to figure out what philosophers have to say about this topic. So I'm doing my research, and I noticed that a lot of people was saying that forgiveness is about the letting go of anger. And then my thought was, what's wrong with anger? I need to figure out why people are so, wrapped up about this anger thing, right? So that became a side project. Although I wrote my dissertation on forgiveness, and the dissertation was totally different from this book, I was going back and forth. Okay, I'm going to write this dissertation on forgiveness. I'm going to give this some chapters to my advisor, and then I'll go back to this anger book. So I was kind of doing both at the same time. And then once I graduated and got my Ph.D., I was like, I'm tired of talking about forgiveness. Let's put that to the side. What is needed is anger, right? Goes into 2020 with the uprisings. This book needs to come out now. And so, but I came to anger via forgiveness.
Yeah, which for me, I resonated deeply with is like, you write that like, yo, like it's okay. Like you can forgive and still be angry.
Yeah.
And I even feel as if like there's part of anger that protects forgiveness in a sense of, now granted, let me just say this. I'm Reverend, you philosopher. So, so you're going to have to help me.
Listen, theology is just, theology is philosophy is the most adjacent thing towards philosophy.
Oh, facts. And I feel like the philosophers, what y'all love is a really good moral argument and a very good moral story, right? So we about to do this right now. We about to put ourselves in an illustrative moment.
Okay.
Here I am. I'm like, yo, there's so much to be angry at in this world. And I feel like there's no room for my anger, because my anger is oftentimes, as you write so beautifully about, like people associate anger with vengeance.
Yeah.
And I associate anger with truth, vulnerability, and responsibility. Like the truth about what happened, this really happened to me. Vulnerability, like feeling what I need to feel whenever I need to feel it and however I need to feel it. And trust that whatever I'm angry at, or the people around that I'm in a relationship with, or whatever, or the situation, that this thing has a responsibility to care for our collective well-being.
Yeah.
And because people feel as if our anger is always vengeance and vindictive, so one say, okay, Black Lives Matter, you must hate white people, or like you're angry at men, at patriarchy, so you must hate men.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if that's the case. I feel like, here I am, I'm your student, and I'm wondering, Dr. Cherry, like, why people feel as if my anger is a bad thing, and as if my anger actually is in the very thing that hold forgiveness together.
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with narrow ways in which we think about anger. And I think you hit on it in the beginning, right? We think that anger is always synonymous with vengeance, right? So I think the most generous interpretation of that criticism could be that they're conflating anger with vengeance. But then the ungenerous kind of realistic interpretation of that is that, the kind of the argument that I make is that anger is very much connected with value and respect, right? So if you perceive that you have value, then you would think that you are warranted a certain kind of respect. And when you're disrespected via wrongdoing, then you will be angry as a result. And if I perceive that you have value and I see that you've been disrespected and you're angry in that particular disrespect, I'll be like, yeah, you got a right to be angry. But if I don't think you have value and that that your life is warranted some kind of respect, then I'll be confused and perplexed about your anger. And I will even criticize it and tell you what to do with it. Right. So I would just say that when it comes to anger. So here's also the interesting thing about the connection between the anger and forgiveness piece is that this is what I found fascinating about kind of the practices that we have is that even in my own life, I realized that when I think about things that people have done to me, because memory is important, memory is not going to go away. You can't forget and forgive and forget. Memory is important. Memory is valuable. That there's just things that I'm reminded about throughout my life. And sometimes I don't even directly think about them. They just come. And I get mad all over again. And, why do I get mad all over again? Well, I remember what happened was really messed up. And so the anger is kind of, in that moment, it's kind of a reminder of the gravity of the situation, that the judgment still holds, that the wrongdoing, was the wrongdoing that it actually was. And so even if I'm able to kind of moderate my anger years ago, there's moments in which the memory may come and the anger may rise back up. And that's the experience that I had with my stepfather. And I think that what that reminds us, since we've been talking about value and respect, it reminds us, in addition to that, it's kind of respecting wrongdoing in a way, right? To say, well, forgive and forget. Well, listen, we forget things that are not important to us, right? For you to forget wrongdoings, to say that wrongdoing was not important, that it was minimal, that it can be forgotten. And I think to remember wrongdoing and still feel a way about it is a way to respect the gravity of the situation, so that, because I think there's a consequence here, so that it cannot be repeated, so that you can, prevent it. Right? That's the reminders. And that's what I think the work of anger is doing. And that's why I refuse to accept the count that what it is to forgive is to let go of that anger. Right? I can forgive in a moment and let go of the intense anger that I have and still say that I've forgiven, even if the anger comes with the memory every now and again. Right?
Yes, that reminds me so much of the kid Jeremiah that you brought up in the book.
Yeah.
And with the woman, who said, if I'm not mistaken, can you remind me of the story? So he's in a Brooklyn bodega, got his book bag on his back, walked past a woman, and his book bag grazed her backside, but she thinks that a 9-year-old has just sexually assaulted her, and she calls the police. And mind you, this is an era in which young Black boys are dying by it when the police gets on the scene. So he's crying and weeping, and come to find out when the video is revealed is that his, what he said actually happened. And so there's a community meeting like a week later, and they give him the mic. And you get kind of nervous in those moments. You get kind of nervous in those moments. But he says, and these are his words, and I quote, "I do not forgive this woman, and this woman needs help." Right? And you think about in that moment that he's still upset about what happened, right? I mean, you can imagine the fear, the indignity of that moment. And although he's young, I think he's insightful and wise in that moment. I mean, he decides, hey, I'm not ready to forgive at this moment. It's all good. I'm not ready to forgive. And
And people might look at that as a kind of a way to criticize him. That looks quite different than the family members of Dylan Roof, et cetera, et cetera. What is up with this guy? But one of the things I try to, like you said, I defend victims. And I think that even in his withholding, he expresses empathy towards the woman, right? He says this woman needs help, right? He expresses compassion in his statement, right? And I think a lot of times it goes back to kind of our narrow view about forgiveness, that we think that not only is anger is about vengeance, that we think that if someone withholds forgiveness, then they're kind of anti-repair, right? Or they want to wreak havoc. And I want to say, no, you can withhold forgiveness and not get in the way of any kind of repair, right? And you can withhold forgiveness and still exhibit virtue and respect and compassion towards the wrongdoer.
Yeah, which takes me back to like the problems. I mean, you lay this out, and I'm going to my notes now. You lay this out in one of the later chapters on home improvement, where you talk about we have problems with process.
Yeah.
We have problems with outcome.
Yeah.
We have problems with pace.
Yeah.
Problems with protection. There's this one-liner that like,
and we're talking about problems that come up in the family, but
yeah, problems that come up in the family. Problems that come up in the family. And yet I feel like this is also problems that come up in society as well.
Of course. Yeah.
Because you make this statement that like no healthy relationship can exist without trust.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was a powerful statement, because I feel like in this moment, like as much as we are in a crisis of book bans, and we are in a crisis of economics, and we're in a crisis of politics, we're in a crisis of all these things, we're in a crisis of, global this and global that, I also feel like we're in a crisis of trust.
Yeah. I mean, we got the classic icebreaker, kind of like things you do in business conferences, the trust fall. The trust fall. You just fall back, you got trust, people are going to catch you. I mean, that's cute for an activity. It's much harder in real life. And one of the things that I kind of echo is that, listen, one of the things that wrongdoing does, it breaks trust, right? Once someone has hurt you, once someone has violated you, that trust has been broken, right? And you may quickly realize that what you did was messed up, but people don't quickly trust you again, right? And that it's not true just for our political relationships. That's also very true when it comes to our family members. So the whole notion of like, you know me. No, I don't. I know you by your works. And your previous works kind of violate the trust, and I need time. And so we're talking about, kind of this pace problem that's not only present in the family, but also present in those reporters' hearings. We want to hurry up and resolve conflict very quickly because it makes us uncomfortable. I call it fallout fatigue. We get very uncomfortable with discomfort. And I think one of the things that we need to sit with wrongdoing. We need to sit with the mess, sit with the discomfort. We need to empathize with the wrongdoer, right? We need to wait it out. I call it kind of responding to it with what I call kind of the wait and relate principle. That it takes a minute to restore. Sometimes it's never restored. So things can never really, a lot of times, a lot of things can't go back to the way that they once were, right? And I think once we understand that, I think that will allow us to be a little bit more patient with healing, but also a little bit more accepting of the outcome. Because it's going to be the point where people are not going to be 100% healed. So the relationship is not going to go back to the way that it was. And we have to be okay with that.
Yeah, and that reminds me of that toward the end. I mean, you've been gesturing toward this the whole time, the idea of radical repair.
Yeah.
That there's a section in the book headed innovate, exclamation point, innovate, exclamation point, innovate, exclamation point. And I want to read this quote because it's so beautiful. You write, and I quote, "Radical repair in our human lives and relationships also involves innovation and creativity. And it's not simply a matter of putting things back to the way they once were. As Elizabeth Spellman reminds us, repair involves something distinctly different from the original creation, but also something distinctly different from its accidental or deliberate destruction, its abandonment. Radical repair, and I quote, and I love this. I'm a preacher, so this just felt good coming off the tongue. Radical repair brings about a new state, different from both creation and destruction, which we can only reach with human ingenuity and creative adaptation.
Yeah.
When you wrote that line, tell me what was going through your head at that line. I mean, you got to give it to me. Give it to the crowd. We need to hear the story.
Here's the thing, Dante. As you're reading, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what's next. I don't remember. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't remember. I mean, one of the things I would say about craft, just for a moment, and one of the things I really enjoyed about writing this book is that every morning that I will write, and it's going to sound trite, but I was learning something along the way. So let me be a little bit more specific about the experience. The muses were in this room. The ancestors was in this room. And so this is, as much as I want to, you would say, oh, you're a Ph.D. in philosophy. You've been thinking about this topic for 8 years. No, when you sit at this desk and you open yourself up to whatever this universe is going to give to you, you take it and you run with it and you write it and you say, thank you. And so as you were reading, I was like, I wonder what he was talking about, because the person who wrote that were inspired and receiving wisdom from something I can't really cite. And so I don't remember writing that. And that's a good thing. But I would say this. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about, and I think what I find liberating about it is twofold. For one, I think us as human beings, we have a tendency to suffer from nostalgia, right? We think that the past was the best thing ever. And I want to admit, I suffer from nostalgia. I collect a whole bunch of things that's old school, records, video games. I'm old school because I think the old school was the best school, right? So it's a sense of nostalgia of the past was the best. But then also, I think as human beings, we have a tendency to have magical utopian thinking, where we think the future is going to be better. And I think that when we think about, we have a tendency to take both of those kinds of thinking when we engage in any kind of reparative, reconciliatory, redemptive healing work. That for one, we try to aim at, let's try to get the relationship back to the way that it was, because the way that it was the best state of affairs. So that's one way, right? And then the other way, we have a tendency to think, if you forgive, our relationship is going to be the best thing that it's going to be the best thing ever created. And I think the challenge is when we're going about radical repair, it's not to think about it in those two extremes, right? That what we end up, if we continue to be in a relationship or even thinking about ourselves, who we end up becoming may not be who we were. But I find beauty in that. And what our relationship may end up becoming may not be what we always thought that it would be. And we got to be okay with that. And I think there's beauty in the middle ground, right? It's beauty in the middle ground. And I think the distraction is the nostalgia and the utopian thinking. And so we try to make people do this, and we try to make victims do this and tell them not to do this because we want it to look this particular way. But I think if we engage in the work of radical repair, which requires an innovation of sorts, because the solutions that work for our relationship, that will work for us personally in the past, for our ancestors, for our community, may not be what will work for us going forward, right? And that's what comes with ingenuity, right? We may be forced to let go of a lot of popular wisdom. That's what I refer to as, creativity, right? But I think engaging in what I call radical repair, which is a repair that's collaborative, that gets to the roots of the problems, that's about innovation. I think engaging in that work is going to get us results that we haven't even thought of. And I think that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the work. That's the beauty of radical repair. And just to say something about radical repair, I think that what a lot of people have done is they know they want something different. They want to recover in the aftermath of wrongdoing. And they have these kind of reparative aims. And the problem is they think that forgiveness is the aim, but it's just one way to get us to the ultimate aim. And I think once we accept that forgiveness is a way, it's not the way, what we ultimately want is repair, then I think that's going to solve a whole bunch of pace problems, outcome problems that I kind of highlight in the book. But I think engaging in the work of radical repair with or without forgiveness is always worth the effort.
I'm going to say amen to that. To those who are on, make sure y'all support Dr. Cherry, not just with your showing up, but with your dialing your sense, tell people about this book. This is a masterclass in forgiveness. Sarah, we got 10 minutes left, and I want to talk to Myisha. Like, I want to talk about, like, because I feel like I know we have writers on here. I know we have people who have dreams of writing books, who have dreams of like doing what we do in public, being a voice in this world, like have dreams of, you know, doing what you have done, taking an idea and stretching it to its farthest possibility that you can in a moment. Doing the vulnerable, the radical, talk about radical repair. I mean, there's another part of this book that's radically vulnerable too, you know, talking about yourself and your family and things like that. So when you got to moments where this process got hard, what did you do? What was your ritual? What did you listen to?
So I must say that I am one of those people I'm a ritualistic person. I love rituals. A lot of the book was written during the pandemic. I got the book contract in June of 2020. It's kind of one of the writing, it was my project during a time that was just awful for lots of us. I am the kind of individual that needs projects, and what better way and what better time to have one than during the pandemic. And so that just improved the ritual. So I want to say that, you know, I'm ritualistic in the sense that when I'm not traveling or speaking, I write Monday through Friday. I don't write all day. I try to at least get 4 hours in. Now, a lot of that writing could be research, could be thinking, could be planning. But I try to, you know, think or write Monday through Friday for at least 4 hours out the day. That's that practice. Now, is it going to make writing easier? No.
Thanks.
Because once you get in there, you're going to have great days and you're going to have bad days. But the ritual is working, and being at the desk. And I treat it like I'm very blessed to have this job that I have. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. I'm the only person in my family to have a Ph.D. There's moments when I talk to my sister and she's like, "You're not at work today?" And I'm like, "I'm not teaching this semester." She doesn't understand this life that I live.
Facts.
You feel me? We come from a working class background. I am blessed. I am blessed. And I have learned a lot about work ethic from watching my mother. And I just respect the working class. And if work got me here, it's going to keep me here, and we're going to keep working. Amen. So I like to punch in and punch out. I don't work when the muse hits me, because that would never happen. So the ritual of just coming to the desk. But I would say something about the ritual that precedes the desk. So I am an early bird. I like to wake up when it's still dark outside. My routine is to get up at 4:30 every morning. And the reason why I do that is I feel at my best very early in the morning. But it's probably the most quietest time of the day. It's a time where I meditate. It's a time where I listen to my jazz music. It's time where I just get my mind right. I journal. And then I also spend time pleasure reading. And then that leads to the office. So you got to think about it. Right before I engage in the ritual of writing and creating, I've already engaged in a ritual in which I filled my cup up. Right? I set my focus, my intention. I've looked inward. I've given myself a lot so that I can perhaps pour out and receive more in that particular moment. And the rituals, plural, they allow that to happen. So that's the kind of person that I am. As an academic, I take this work very seriously. This is my vocation. This is not just a job for me. I don't write just to get promotions, but I write for the people. And I'm not just writing anything just to fill up anything. I write with intention. Every topic is intentional. I feel like I'm called to write the things that I write. And so that's how I roll. And that requires me to be full, me to be focused, and me to be disciplined.
Facts, facts. Now, for the people who actually don't know, you love art too.
Yes.
Tell me about the background. You got to give me the whole room inspiration.
See, this is interesting because this is just the office. I got much more. I got much more going on the outside. So the office has a lot of reprints. But I think what you're seeing, so this is interesting here. There's a reprint of Basquiat, and this is a reprint of Basquiat's painting called Max Roach. And for those who don't know, Max Roach was a drummer during the cool jazz era, prolific, wonderful drummer. And so that's his dedication to Max Roach. And then what you probably don't mind, and Jason's going to kill me for this, Jason Reynolds. Back in the day, Jason Reynolds came out with a book with Jason Griffin. And it was an art book, and they self-published it. And the book was so amazing that I took some of the prints out and framed them. He does not know this. Please do not tell him this. And all of them has his face on it. So it's strange to have your best friend. But I'm inspired by some of these images. There's also a Carol Walker reprint. So it's just Blackness all up in here. I have so much more going out. What you don't see to my left is kind of an inspiration wall where I have like what I call my office mates. I see you have some in the background. So we got Toni Morrison, we got James Baldwin, we got Carol Walker, we got Malcolm, and some other inspiration. But artists, I need art. I told you I start my day listening to jazz music. I think, as a person who thought they would be an artist for life, I think one of the greatest gifts that we have as human beings is to be able to create things. And I'm inspired by visual art. I'm inspired by music, and it just really makes me feel human and opens me up to the possibility of creation. And I need to have it in every wall in my house, which I definitely do.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Dr. Cherry. Thank you to everyone who's shown up. And I'm very proud of you. Let me just tell you,
thank you, brother.
Proud of you. So inspired by you. Keep going, keep going, keep going. I am your student from afar. And I am very thankful that this book exists in the world. The world is definitely a much better place. I'm going to be a much better human being, a much better husband, much better father, much better writer, much better preacher, because you and your work exist. So
thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Dante, thanks for such a spirited and thoughtful and heartfelt interview. So well prepared. We really appreciate it. You took people on a nice journey through Professor Cherry's work. You had some good questions that came in. And I want to get to, and I know I definitely after hours want to talk to you a little bit about that really beautiful point about the tension between nostalgia and utopia. And those two pieces, was just really spoke to me. So of the questions that came in during the event, I want to ask Maureen's first. She said, would you agree if one needs to hurt oneself to forgive the other, forgiveness is not an option, maybe just at this time or maybe ever?
So say that line again.
Sure. And I'm just gonna read it as she wrote it. Would you agree if one needs to hurt oneself to forgive the other, forgiveness is not an option, maybe just at this time or maybe ever? Maybe, I think she meant maybe not just at this time or maybe ever.
Yeah. So the hurt yourself in order to forgive someone else. And that's where I think a lot of people have hurt themselves in order to offer forgiveness, right? And a lot of it has to do with because they've been pressured to think, hey, if you don't forgive, then you're bitter. Right? You're going to be accused of being bitter. You're going to be accused of getting in the way of repair. You're going to be, confused for like holding on to stuff, not letting stuff go, or, making it uncomfortable for Thanksgiving dinner. And so what people do is, because we have a tendency to kind of be concerned about what people think about us, but also be more concerned about our family and other people than ourselves, what end up happening is that we do end up hurting ourselves, doing things that we think are not best for us. Because I think anytime you don't make the best decision for you, in ways that you should, looking out for your own self protection and survival, and you do it to other people, then you know that you're doing it to hurt you. And I think one of the things that I hope that this book would do, once again, is the theme of giving power back to the victims, speaking up on behalf of victims, as it suggests that they should not be stuck with the dilemma of, hurting themselves via forgiveness. There's other choices, and I hope that people will leave my book not only with thinking about other choices, but feeling vindicated. That hey, I was right not to let it go, or whatever it means, which we can talk a little bit more in the chat. And there's nothing wrong with me doing it. It's all good.
I'd be curious at after hours too to explore a little bit about the role that gender plays as well, because about being just what it means to be a good girl, what it means to be a nice girl, what it means to, is it somehow a greater expectation upon women to forgive than upon men? Is it somehow actually more masculine in some ways to not forgive, that's somehow a sign of strength? Which is then maybe the paradox of so if a man does forgive, is that somehow noble? Because it's going against type in some way, so I'd be curious to talk a little bit more about that as well. So we're at 7:59. Myisha, you have the floor. Do you want to offer any closing thoughts in the last 60 seconds here?
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. It shows an interest, not only just for the topic simplicity, but it shows that you all have recognized that when it comes to forgiveness, we're failing. And I hope that the book will be a guide post to helping all of us do forgiveness much better. And that's my hope for you and hope for us.
Thank you. Thanks for spending your last event of your book tour with FAN. We really appreciate it. I know it's been a long book tour, and we're honored to host.